Warning! Warning! This podcast contains spoilers.
Listen at your own risk.
Welcome to Medium Shift, the podcast that investigates how stories stack up from medium to medium through the adaptation process.
Today's episode, we piss off the CIA with The Losers.
Welcome to Medium Shift. I'm Chris, film purist.
And I'm Ev, film garbage.
So this week we're continuing our collection of episodes looking at the films of Chris Evans. Last week was Captain America: The First Avenger, and this week we're going into The Losers.
Ooh,
Very
sticking
exciting.
with the comic book theme, but jumping publisher.
Yeah, exactly. There's a bit of a trend with Chris Evans' sort of filmography. He really does love his comic book movies. So shall I do the summary or?
No, all yours.
So The Losers. A tale of double-cross and revenge centered upon the members of an elite US Special Forces unit sent into the Bolivian jungle on a search and destroy mission. The team, Clay, Jensen, Roke, Pooch, and Cougar, find themselves the target of a lethal betrayal instigated from inside by a powerful enemy known only as Max. Intimidating name. Presumed dead, the group makes plans to even the score when they are joined by the mysterious Aisha, a beautiful operative with her own agenda. Working together, they must remain deep undercover while tracking the heavily guarded Max, a ruthless man bent on embroiling the world in a new high-tech global war. So, The Losers. Action, comedy, comic book movie, vaguely starring Chris Evans, but mostly Jeffrey Dean Morgan. What do we think of this film?
I thought it was fun. It was entertaining. It was lighthearted. Just something you could sit down and just sort of take your mind off.
I think that's fair. Honestly, I kind of feel the same way, and that essentially... So I've seen this film twice. I saw it a little while ago, and then I saw it again for this podcast. And as much as while I'm watching it, I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of enjoying this is like a fun action movie, I don't remember any of it. Like, it immediately goes in one ear and then goes out the other, which honestly I don't think makes for a particularly great film. But, you know, in the moment, it's fun. It has some good set pieces, some interesting characters, and, you know, jokes and so on. So it's kind of just... Yeah, as you said, basically a switch your brain off action film that you can just chuck on at any moment and have playing in the background or pay, you know, very little attention to and still get enough out of it. So, yeah, inoffensive. I think inoffensive is the best word for it. Inoffensive, but forgettable.
Unless you're offended by lots of violence.
Well, yeah, sure, okay. Yeah, inoffensive in that it's not anything special, but it's not anything destructive either, so...
Yeah.
Yep.
I do feel its most positive feature, and the parts that I remember most vividly, are some of the visual sort of scenes they have. Unlike some of the other movies around that time and a bit earlier that were adapted from comic books, The Losers really delved into its sort of comic history and tried to sort of establish that look in a different way.
The visual style is probably one of the best things the movie has going for it, yeah.
There was some fantastic scenes, like the fight scene between Clay and Aisha in the burning hotel room.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Strikes to mind.
Sexy fighting.
Yes.
It's always exciting, isn't it?
But just the one scene where she's basically about to punch him right in the face and everything sort of slows down. You have the fire come down, pans out, and basically looks like a comic book scene. Like a frame straight from there.
Yeah, which is appropriate. So the from what I have read, actually, a lot of the cinematographers and people behind the scenes were very intentional in giving all the different locales that the film goes to like a very different, distinct color palette and style, almost the same way a comic book would, basically, by working with colors. So,
well, that is actually a main feature of the comic book itself. Jumping quite ahead in our little detail here.
Huzzah!
But,
We're already getting into the sources.
but Jock the illustrator, he basically had it set up as for each location was a color scheme of 3 separate colors that would make up the main fundamentals of those in order to distinguish everything. So when they're fighting in the Middle East, it uses browns, oranges, and some greys.
So distinct for the Middle East.
But when they move to location, it's based on, they move closer to the city, it goes for a blue, grey, and green, more color palette. And so it's very 3 distinct colors in each location that they keep coming back to. That plays out on everything. And I feel that's what they we're going for with the movie.
Yeah, true. And obviously you're not going to have it as quite as distinct in the film for the simple fact that you can't make a movie with 3 different colours in one location. But I do think that sort of comes across in a visual way, because you do kind of notice at times that a lot of scenes feel particularly different from one another purely based on the colour palette, which is nice. There's a lot of flat, sort of drab action movies out there that are normally the ones going for like the gritty, realist style. Like the first films that come to mind are The Expendables, which just look completely flat and dull when you're looking at it. And The Losers doesn't have that problem, which I think is nice. Yeah.
It was nice seeing a climactic fight scene break out in broad daylight and be able to see everything that's going on.
What? What a revolutionary idea! You can see the action? Isn't that strange?
Yeah, it is.
Man, what novel filmmaking, truly. Alright. Well, do we want to move into the sources then?
Yes. Let's do that.
Cool.
So, The Losers is based on The Losers, surprisingly enough,
What a shock.
which was a comic book written by Andy Diggle and illustrated by Jock. And it was a limited run collection. I think it lasted about 3 years.
2003 to 2006.
Yes, 3 years.
Yeah, well, I know. I'm just specifying. Yeah, settle down.
Thank you. And it was essentially about, much like the movie, a covert CIA team that gets abandoned and essentially are dead to everyone's knowledge. And they have to get revenge on the character known as Max, who's the guy that basically has been orchestrating everything and is in a global conspiracy and basically a main figurehead in the war on terror, which is one of the big distinctions between the comics and the movie, is the fact that the comics is set mainly around the Middle East and America, dealing with everything that's going on around that time. So dealing with the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, dealing with Bush administration and going to war, and basically all the fear and terror that was going around at that time.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good distinction to make, actually, in that the original comic book is very much centered on contemporary politics at the time, whereas The Losers, which came out 4 years after the comic actually ended, is much more, shall we say, kind of universal, basically, and then it's not inherently connected to Afghanistan or the war and terror or anything like that. It's more just military ops. And then Max isn't necessarily head of the war and terror, but more like basically a global terrorist who's trying to use, was it an eco bomb or something like that?
I believe that's what they were calling it.
Which,
Or an electro destabilizer or something.
yeah, that sounds exactly like...
Science words, big explosion that leaves no rubble.
Exactly. That's all you need to know, really. And nothing like that was really in the comic, as far as I'm aware. So.
No. The comics, especially due to the fact that they were a long-form media, and there were lots of things building up to it, it was very much more inherent on conspiracy and, select people that they have to either save or assassinate, and how everything sort of builds up.
I think that's fair. And obviously, like, in a film, you're going to have a limited runtime, so you can't really be building conspiracies and mysteries, over the same way that you can with so many issues in a comic book. So that's just sort of looking at the differences between the two mediums. That being said, so the film is based on the first volume, correct? I think it's 2 storylines that it takes.
It takes, from what I've gathered, it takes its main sort of ideas loosely from the first 2 collected issues, which were roughly issue 1 through to issue 14, and then 14 to 32, I believe.
Yes, that's correct. So the first arc, which is Anti-Up, I think it's called, and then the second one, Double Down. Yeah, so, and then everything after that, obviously the comic keeps going, but the film never really...
Well, there are a few, it does bring in lots. Again, it's trying to wrap up a lot of things. So the betrayal that happens in the movie, spoiler alert.
Surprise.
That comes in a bit later in the comic book, and you don't find out so much. So the opening scene, which is the original 5, Clay, Jensen, Roke, Cougar, and
Pooch.
Yeah,
of course.
It's the weird name.
It's a weird name. Yeah.
That, of course, sets it up early in the movie, so you sort of know. In the comic books, that doesn't come in until quite far down the line. And it also sets up the fact that they, in the flashback, they've actually met Max before. So there's less of the trying to find out what he looks like or who he is, because they sort of already have an idea, because he's already implanted himself deep within the CIA.
Okay, interesting.
And his own personal little army thing.
is already going on, basically.
Yeah.
Interesting. So Max isn't quite a mysterious figure in the comics, essentially.
Well, there is still a lot of mystery. One of the things, spoiler alert for the comics, one of the things that the movie alludes to but doesn't show is when they show Max, he's constantly has a glove on his hand that's either white or black, and he sort of appears in multiple places. That's because in the comics, Max is actually two people.
And that's a kind of a nice visual nod to it, actually. Whereas in the film, he has a scar on that hand, if I remember correctly, and that's why he's wearing the glove. Yeah, interesting. In many respects, it is kind of, I don't want to necessarily say faithful, but it takes the basic narrative essence of the original comic and then adapts it, and then changes quite a bit of the round of that. But then the framework itself sort of stays the same. So there was
certainly a love for the comic that they then updated for a more mainstream audience, I'd say.
For sure. Yeah, make things much more of a, universal action comedy that you don't necessarily need to be aware of comics basically to enjoy. So, shall we move on to the characters then? Or
yes, let's do that.
Compare and dissimilarities. So, honestly, I kind of want to start just with Jensen. So, Chris Evans.
Yes, well, it is his fest that we're going with, so may as well start with the main man. Even though he is not the main man in this movie.
He's not the main man, but I wish he was the main man. Because frankly, I probably found him the most entertaining out of all of them. So it's so strange, especially considering I saw the losers after I saw things like Captain America and Snowpiercer and everything like that. To see Chris Evans basically lean into like a very broad comic relief character. Like I never would have imagined him as a comic relief character after watching Snowpiercer. But here he is, and he seems to be having a really good time and, doing a real good job of it as well. So
well, I've known Chris Evans as a comedic actor for a while. I've seen him in things like Not Another Teen Movie he was in, and there are a few other little comedies that he sort of starts with early on. It wasn't until basically Captain America that they went, oh yeah, we can make him a full leading action hero man with dramatic roles.
Yeah, he's got the beefcake for it. It's fine.
But there is some really interesting stuff with him out there. Some couple of good rom-coms as well, if you're into that sort of thing.
He has directed a rom-com as well, I'm aware, which is interesting. So a whole other side story, actually. But initially, he was a little bit concerned whether he was going to continue as Captain America for the Avengers and all that. And said, I might be quitting after this movie and so on. Then he goes off, directs his own film, turns out to be a flop and no one likes it, and he comes back and I'm like, yeah, I could probably do a couple more Avengers movies. So, but how exactly do you think he sort of compares to the Jensen of the comics?
I feel it's pretty faithful. The Jensen in the comics is a constant motor mouth, from what I've read. Like you can even just see, because it's comic books, the speech bubbles that you have compared to everyone else, his is about 3 times the size.
That sounds about right. Yeah, and I think that comes across in the movie fairly well. It is interesting, because obviously him being the comic relief, he's a character that you can probably adapt much more straightforward, in that there's no real sort of plot or narrative elements that he's tied into. He can literally just sort of keep all the basic traits from the comic book and then adapt it to the film, and then it just becomes a broad, comedic relief role.
And it helps that his key scene in the movie, which is the office heist that he's part of.
Ah, yes. My personal favourite scene in the movie as well, to be honest.
That is directly lifted from the comics.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
Oh, fantastic.
In fact, I believe, reading an interview with Andy Diggle, that was one of his favourite parts, was that and the helicopter scene in which they steal the truck with a helicopter and a magnet, because that was also lifted straight from the comics, and it was Andy's sort of favorite things.
Lifted straight from the comics, because there's a magnet, there's a helicopter. Yeah.
Moving quickly on.
Sorry. Yep. That is a really good scene as well, actually. Yeah. Don't stop believing. So moving, I guess probably the guy we should have started with was actually Franklin Clay, which is the whole leader of the group. He's the, what's the name of the guy in the A-Team? Something we haven't really mentioned so far, but there's a lot of similarities between the losers and the A-Team. Is it?
It helps that it was released at basically the same time as the A-Team.
It does not help the comparisons at all. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, in the film, he's played by Jeffrey Dean Morgan, who, frankly, I think does a pretty good job as well. Like, it's a bit of a recurring trend that even though I find the movie kind of forgettable, it's got a pretty good cast. It's pretty well cast, and I think a lot of the people do good in the roles, even if it is, like, really... They're playing very broad stereotypes, essentially. Like, there's not a whole lot of character work going on here, but... They're talented enough actors that I don't really mind, to be honest. They're just entertaining to watch. Yeah, what do you think of Jeffrey Dean Morgan?
I found it quite interesting. It was the only character sort of dealing with a full emotional the emotional side of things, leading with his heart rather than his head.
Yep.
Which, with the comics, it's kind of up to interpretation, I'll put it that way.
Yeah, fair enough. He seems like much more meticulous in the comics, basically.
He does.
Yeah. I guess that's one thing they sort of changed to give the movie the bare bones of an emotional arc, one might say.
Well, it is also trying to condense his entire huge arc that they have in the comics for all the characters, condense that down into 90 minutes, which is no easy feat.
Oh yeah, that's for sure. So obviously they're going to be cutting some corners. So especially him and his relationship with Roke, who's played by Heimdall in the movie, whose name Idris Elba. There we go. Had a random mental blank there for the moment. So why is Heimdall the first role I come up with? That's interesting.
Go with Luther usually.
Oh yeah, I haven't seen Luther, but I have heard it's quite good. I should go with Nelson Mandela. He was a very good Mandela. But yeah, so obviously their relationship. I assume Roke becomes traitorous in the comics. I didn't actually get a look into that.
He does, yes. If I am remembering this correctly, that he's the one that there's a midway traitor, which is, I believe, was Roke. Again, memory's a little foggy. It's a long series.
Yeah, fair enough.
And then at the very end of the comics, they're betrayed by Aisha.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Interesting. So that obviously doesn't come across in the movie then, so...
No.
Yeah,
well, I think they were setting up sequels as well with the movie.
Well, that's true. Everything's trying to set up a sequel these days. But for the most part, like, obviously there's that whole thing that she's the shifting double agent, sort of outside the loyalty and whether we can trust her and all that, so... But, no, she remains relatively faithful in the film, at the very least. And does show up with a rocket launcher at the very end, so... As faithful as you can be in that situation. So yeah, so do you think they did a relatively good job sort of adapting their relationship, particularly on screen? Because those were the two that I felt like had the most history out of the cast, so...
That's going to be a hard one to sort of break down, in my opinion. Because the Aisha character in the comics is actually not as basic as you would. She is very much her own sort of lone wolf, but is joining the team for her own reasons, and then has her own side missions and stuff, and another arc with some other characters.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so she's a little bit more than the token female that she is in the film.
Yes, and I feel the film basically, in condensing her character, condenses down the relationship she has with each of the losers.
Yeah,
rather than just Clay.
I think that's fair. I guess if there was a sequel, that could have been something that they expanded on, but we don't really see too much of it in the movie. Yeah,
it was very basic. There's not much you can sort of extrapolate from there. It almost felt like a shoehorned in kind of...
Yeah, that's kind of true. Like, she's almost just there just because she's from the comics, basically, and to have the one token female as well, obviously. Yeah. What did you think of Zoe Saldana in the role?
I did think she did a very good job with it. She can hold her own in the action scenes. That is... Absolutely, no doubt about that.
100%.
A couple of bits felt a little flat, I think, but I think that was just what the scenes, rather than her performance itself, didn't have much to work with, and therefore wasn't a whole lot.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think she did the best with what she was given to her, basically, considering she is still basically the sex appeal of the movie, and is kind of pushed aside for like even... That one scene that really annoyed me in the film when they found out that she was the double agent. She's in bed with Clay and all that.
Shatter.
And the mirror shatter. Yep. And they literally bend time and space so you can see her ass as she runs away. I'm like, it was
a fantastic shot, but the subject matter was very dicey.
Oh, yep. I'm like, that's too far. Yeah. So that I wasn't a fan of. And I feel like her character kind of suffers for that in a way that a lot of female characters in action movies do, unfortunately. So that's obviously not a new thing. You can point that out in a lot of other films. But yeah, that was probably the one character that I was kind of a little bit let down on. And there are still the other couple of like lesser characters that we haven't really mentioned, but there's Cougar, Pooch, and Jensen as well, I guess, to some extent, that basically act as kind of a supporting cast just to play off those three main characters. Like, I mean, Rook, Clay, and Aisha are definitely the big three, and then the other three kind of just play off them. So Cougar, I think, barely has any lines in the film, actually, from what I remember. He literally just says, "Don't take my hat," and then snipes a bunch of people.
Well, he probably had the least amount of line. He wasn't as silent in the comics as he was in this, but, still had probably less of a few lines because he was just meant to be the calm, sort of almost stoic sniper who can take out what he needs to and then disappear into the night or pull out awesome action rolls while jumping out of burning buildings.
Yeah, exactly.
That is also a scene in the comics. It is very good.
Nice. Yeah, once again, it's sort of like he's leaning into that broad stereotype of like the classic, quiet, focused sniper. So
It's good to see him smile, though, more than most snipers in action movies.
That's true. I mean, at least he sort of has, like, especially that that really nice moment in the building scene that we were talking about earlier, when he snaps the two guys and then sort of salutes Jensen from across the way. I'm like, oh, that's actually kind of nice. That's the one thing I actually remember him doing in the film, to be honest. So
there was also, for some reason, the shot of Jensen and Kruger working on the dolls in the factory when they were trying to settle into their new lives.
Oh, that's right.
You don't see those kind of scenes in most action movies.
That's true. That was actually pretty good. Yeah. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it is hard considering how little of this film I remember after watching it so recently. But, I mean, in the moment, I definitely remember enjoying it. It just doesn't make a lasting impact. Is there anything else you want to talk about in relation to the comics, or...?
Not too much that I can think of, aside from the fact that I was very pleased to see early on that they actually used a sort of amalgamation of the comics characters and the actors for their little intro graphics that they had in the opening scene, where it cut between the live action to comic illustration characters.
That's a good point, actually. Sort of goes back
nice
to that whole
touch.
Visual style we were talking about earlier. Yeah, as I said, I think that's probably the best thing the movie has going for it, which is nice. I kind of feel like a lot of, I mean, comic book films definitely sort of lean into it, but I really think they should learn from movies like this one, maybe Scott Pilgrim vs. the World as well. But if you go in with a really distinct style and all that, even if your movie's mediocre, it's going to elevate it a little bit more beyond that. Just don't make a movie that looks like everything else.
Absolutely.
It'd be nice.
DC. It's weird though, given this is effectively DC. I mean, technically it's Vertigo.
Yeah, but after it's integrated into DC, so I mean, it's a DC film essentially, but it's also one of those that's kind of completely disconnected. The same way that like Big Hero 6 is technically a Marvel film, but in more so it's a Disney movie. Yeah, even though it is based on a really obscure Marvel property. So interesting. So overall, film is fun but forgettable, shall we say? I mean, for me, maybe you have a better memory for it than I do.
I probably do, but more key scenes rather than the full movie itself.
Yep, the full Monty, shall we say?
Yes, it has its fantastic moments, and the rest is just enjoyable fluff.
Enjoyable fluff. Very, very appropriate. Oh, one other thing I do want to mention, actually, just in case someone does want to call this out, but the original Losers comics was actually loosely based on a previous comic.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, the 1940s one with the same name, about a group of World War II soldiers, but at the same time, it's very loosely based, and Andy Deagle has specifically said that he didn't read any of the original issues, so I didn't really think it was worth sort of commenting on that.
No. Well, there is the illusions that Clay's character is actually the grandson of the original loser, Captain.
Yeah.
Who I can't remember his name right now.
Captain Loser, shall we call him?
That is just a terrible superhero name. But yeah,
I'd watch that
the
film.
original Losers was very much just of its time, World War II, during the time of World War II.
Wow, yeah.
Just army stories, basically what the superhero comics originally started as.
Yeah, basically. So I think it should be worth mentioning that is technically a source material, but very loosely connected.
It's source in name only, effectively.
Yeah, that's essentially it. So awesome. Shall we move on to Do It Differently?
Yes, let's do that.
Jingle.
Jingle.
Very good, very good. I was looking at you. There was a pause. I'm like, are you going to see me? Are we going to go for this? I mean, we've nailed it so many other times, so...
I was ready for it, but I saw you get super excited and it pulled me back a bit. Just like, whoa, okay, he's ready for this.
Fair enough. Sorry, I'll tone it back next time. Okay.
No, it was nice seeing such a joy in your eyes for what is ostensibly a stupid part of our podcast.
True. Hey, you got to take the victories where they come. Okay, do you want to go first this week, or shall I?
I don't mind.
That doesn't...
Rock, paper, scissors?
Fine, rock, paper, scissors. Okay. Rock, paper, scissors. Rock, paper, scissors. Yeah! Okay, so does that mean I go first if I win?
You decide.
Okay, I'll go first. Okay, so honestly, this is kind of similar to Captain America and the First Avenger, that I kind of struggled with what I want to change, because I think it's just it's a perfectly fine movie, and to make it anything more beyond that would literally just be making a completely different film. So honestly, what I would kind of want to do is keep it relatively the same, but then draw more inspiration on both Scott Pilgrim vs. the World and Kick-Ass, and basically elevate the visual style that it initially had to more and more absurd levels. Because, I mean, as silly as an action film it is, it still vaguely stays grounded in reality. And honestly, I would love it to just go that another level, basically, where everyone's basically a stupid action star and everything's highly stylized, bring in plenty of bullet time and Matrix. And I feel like, even if I don't know if it'd necessarily make for a better movie, it'd definitely make for a more entertaining and memorable movie as well. So basically just go all in with a distinct style and basically just make a comic book version of The Matrix with the A-Team thrown in. Yeah, which I think would be nice. So that's pretty much it. Nothing major. No, there's no real, like, I don't know, change director or anything like that. Just lean into the best part about the movie and hopefully that'll make things better.
Great, so this is another week where our ideas are identical.
Oh, god damn it. We should really discuss this beforehand.
We should, shouldn't we? I wouldn't lean so much on The Matrix. I would, instead of going more actiony, I'd go for the more comic-y sort of, as in the comedic
okay.
route.
Yeah, sure.
Because I feel that's where a lot of its strengths, as well as the visual style, it's sort of
Yep. And that's good.
In a self-aware way.
And that's a good way we can differentiate ourselves as well.
Yes,
You take
that
the
too.
comedic route, I'll take the action route.
Yeah, just if it, sort of not overly meta that I feel a lot of movies try and fail, but just a nice little level of self-awareness in their comedy and basically amp it up to what you see. It's weird that we're going further away from the adaptation than what the actual movie is.
Yeah.
I would bring in a couple of things from the comic, like just to flesh out the character of Max a bit better. I'd say lean in more, make him really just that evil bastard that he is in the comics, and bring in his twin.
Yep.
Just to give some depth to the villains.
Just of course, because Max is... See, that's the funny thing, we didn't even mention Max in the whole discussion.
Yeah.
Because frankly, even thinking back now, I don't even remember what he looks like. It's not a good sign.
I remember what he looks like purely because it's not what I imagine the Max in the comics would look like in the...
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, so that's actually a good point, actually.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about the villain. He's that forgettable.
And it did have a few of his problems with the fact that he was like, he showed it, he was evil by just shooting a bunch of random people.
Oh, that's right, and blowing all the kids out of the sky.
Yeah.
Because he has to show that's like the most evil thing you can possibly do.
Yeah.
That shorthand, oh, I'm a bad guy, really pisses me off.
So I think my main aspect of do it differently is do the villains differently. Give him and his right-hand man, who's also in the comics, but does not last long in the comics.
Oh, helpful.
Give them a bit more of a fleshed out, less sort of token. So bring the seriousness to them in and liven up the comedic sides of the heroes. Basically, a sort of balance off of the two.
No, I like it, yeah. If we combined both our directions together, we might actually get a good movie. What a miraculous idea.
Wow. Why aren't we doing that?
Because we're not Hollywood executives. Even if we were, we'd probably find a way to screw it all up. I mean, to the most part, that's definitely generalizing. I have heard of some instances where studio meddling has actually made a film better, but 90% of the time, not so much. Yeah, which isn't helpful. So...
I feel we'd rely too heavily on just Chris Evans.
Oh yeah, true. Just make Chris Evans everything. We'll just cast Chris Evans as every single role in the movie and just basically keep changing up his facial hair. It's like a good version of Meet Dave, if anyone actually remembers that film.
See, I was going for a more Monty Python route, but entirely Chris Evans.
Oh yeah, sure. I wouldn't be opposed to that as well. Yeah. I mean, I would like to see Chris Evans do some more comedic stuff, but I guess that's probably because I don't have as much experience with his comedic side as you do, so... Yeah, he's more Captain America, gritty action hero to me.
In that case, I'd recommend, in our movie
Ooh, what a
I'd
segue.
go see him in Not Another Teen Movie.
Oh yeah, okay. You did mention this one before.
I did.
Yeah. Is this actually... This isn't by the same people who do Disaster Movie and
No.
Not Another Teen Movie?
It is different.
Okay, sure.
Well, the people who do Not Another Teen Movie are the people who do Not Another Teen Movie.
No, it's not. It's... I don't remember the name
Scary
of it.
Movie?
Yeah, maybe Scary Movie I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These are different people.
Oh, good.
That's
That's already a big tick.
Yeah, the name went through changes and it's a whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
The movie itself is still quite interesting. It is full of has a bit of gross out humour in it, very sort of the sexual innuendos and things.
Oh no, not another teen movie. Sorry, I just had to throw that in there. All right, continue.
Yes. Well, it is effectively a parody of those teen rom-coms, John Hughes type movies and things. Yeah, it plays off a lot of things. Plays into a lot of She's All That.
Oh yeah,
is where it takes a lot of its main inspiration from.
American Pie, I would assume as well. If it's quite gross out, or
not as much. I'd
okay.
say.
That's another tick in my book.
It may share a sort of similar kind of humor, but story and plot-wise, they're quite different. So Chris Evans plays the sort of jock character who's makes a bet to turn the artsy nerdy girl, played by Kyla Lee. Not entirely sure how you...
Chrysler Lee.
Sure, she's a car now. So it has to take Honda Lee out on... and make her the prom queen, like in She's All That, and then on the way they find love.
Oh, of
but
course.
Instead of going through that, it's basically they pack it full of ironic and self-aware humor and jokes.
I'm just having a look at this online. By God, look at Chris Evans' eyebrows. They have a mind of their own. Wow, this actually looks pretty interesting.
Look, if you're into those kind of comedies, it's a very good recommendation. I feel it on top of those, especially around that time with the scary movies and stuff, where parodies were at their sort of renaissance, I'd say. It is very much up there for those. Still not saying a whole lot, because most of those were terrible. It just happens to be the diamond in the rough.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I will have to give it a look. And I assume that'd be one of Chris Evans' earlier roles as well, wouldn't it?
It was, yes, if I'm not mistaken.
Cool.
It has a fairly interesting cast who've all gone on to done a lot of better things.
It's like the band of brothers of teen movies, basically.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, where all these really sort of lesser-known actors at the time have gone on to become massive movie stars. Cool. I will have to give it a look. Yeah, I'm disappointed actually that your segue worked so well, because I couldn't do the what have you been reading / eating / consuming / enduring this week, but at the same time I couldn't think of anything else to add on to it, so maybe that's for the best. My personal recommendation for this week, I am actually very excited about, because I discovered a film about a week ago that I'd never heard of before, basically, and I just saw it on SBS On Demand. I'm like, oh yeah, that looks interesting, and gave it a look in and fell in love. This is it's a film called The Secret of Kells. It's an animated movie about Irish folklore. It's based on the Book of Kells, which is an ancient, I believe, sort of Catholic text. I'm not incredibly familiar with it, which is why I found the movie so fascinating. But it basically follows this young boy who's sort of living in a convent that have been building walls all around it to protect them from the Viking invasion. When this new sort of priest comes in, and he's been working on this book, this religious text that has all these beautiful illustrations in it, and basically follows this boy as he slowly becomes this man's apprentice, and then the Vikings attack, and there's a whole lot of drama going on and all that, and it's really, really good. Like, not only is it beautifully animated, because it looks like all of those, like, classic sort of Celtic ruins drawings or something like that, it's really simple, and it's got big, bold style and all that, and it goes into all this fascinating mythology. It's just... It's one of those movies that I think does a really good job of sort of giving you a glimpse into another sort of culture and history that you're not particularly familiar with. Because I'd never heard of the Book of Kells or any of this history before I saw this film. But then, like, looking at all this, I just kind of fell in love. And this film is just so beautiful and so interesting and made me cry at the end. And I love it to death. So it's definitely a smaller film, so it might be a little bit hard to find. And the only, like, big name actor in the film is Brendan Gleeson. Beyond that, there's a lot of sort of unknowns who all do a really, really good job as well. But I would definitely suggest giving it a look in, because it is very, very good. And I was so pleased that I managed to find another diamond in the rough, one might say.
Hey.
Well, thank you very much for listening to this episode of Medium Shift. You can find us at mediumshift@gmail.com. Feel free to send in all love, hate, Bitcoin, recommendations, so on and so forth. We'll respond to it as much as we can. And next week, we're going to be continuing Evans Fest by getting on a train in the snow.
Snowpiercer. Really?
Well,
You're going with Train on the Snow?
Well, you know...
You've been so creative in the past.
Well,
Chris.
okay, fine. I had to think of something up on the spot, okay? Because this is not something I prepared for. I apologize. Listen in next time, and I'm sure we'll have a better one. Alright, until next time, fare thee well.
Bye.